Hello friends, welcome to Tarun IAS. Today we will be discussing editorial from the Hindu newspaper of 14th of December 2022. So let's start with the editorial. Editorial is about the rural manufacturing. You can relate it with your general studies paper 3, that is Indian economy and sectors of economy. Now the article is about the rise of rural manufacturing. This has been written by M. Suresh Babu, who is a professor of economics at IIT Madras, and he is also currently an advisor to the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council. So let's discuss what the writer has to say. Now, let's first talk about the context here. Context here is that the context is the movement of manufacturing from urban to rural areas, and the writer has given various reasons for this. But before we go into the reasons that have been given by the writer, we would first talk about that why it is of utmost significance that there has been a movement of manufacturing from cities to rural area. See, in India, according to the census 2011, rural population contributes to approximately 70%. And if we consider the streams of migration, especially from the Hindi heartland, especially from the states such as Bihar, Jharkhand, Odisha, Madhya Pradesh, to other states such as Gujarat, Maharashtra, Kerala, Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh, so there have been a stream of migration. Now this, if the migration is skewed in nature, that means if it is not properly regulated and there is no uniform distribution of the labor, then it puts two kind of burden on the respective states. The first one is the state of origin, where there will be a burden of reduced capital, human capital, and the other one is the destination state, where there will be an increased or enhanced burden to cater to the needs of the population, that the migrant population. Right, so in order to ensure that there is an equitable distribution of justice and the socio-economic resources, it is of utmost significance that the manufacturing moves from cities to rural area. Now, there are of course several constraints in the urban areas which have kind of mobilized the manufacturing units from urban to rural area. But if we consider the size of the economy and the need for the development and the regional balance with respect to the dispersal of the manufacturing activities, it is a welcome sign. However, the first instance or the first constraint that writer talks about is about the global competition, which gets extend beyond the consideration of the low wage production, and it depends upon the virtues of the conducive ecosystem for firms to grow. So basically, global competition, it impacts the manufacturing. Right, so therefore the firms, especially the formal firms, they tends to move to the rural areas, and this is known as the race to the bottom. This is known as the race to bottom. Now, what is this race to bottom? The formal sector or the big manufacturing units, let's say example of Reebok, or let's say example of Nike, etc., the football brands. So what happens now, these tends to locate their industries or their manufacturing units in a region where there would be low wage, but the worker can be skilled in short period of time so as to achieve high grade or high quality product. This is the impact of the global competition, which promotes race to bottom. Now this manufacturing away from the urban location, it was brought into the limelight first by a paper that was published by the World Bank by Ghani Azaz et al. In the year 2012 by the name Is India's Manufacturing Sector Moving Away from Cities? The policy research working paper by World Bank. So that was the first instance where this was highlighted. So now what does the study investigated? The investigation was with respect to the urbanization of the Indian manufacturing sector by combining the enterprise data from formal and informal sectors, and it was found that the formal sectors are moving away from the urban areas into the rural location, while the informal sectors, they are moving from rural to urban locations. Now, this result basically suggested the higher urban-rural cost ratio, which has caused this shift. Now let us move on to the reality of the urbanization. Now, as the urbanization grows, the first reality is it is not uniform. There is no uniformity. It is skewed in nature. That means some areas are highly urbanized and the other areas are sometimes they remain for a long period of time in transition zone itself, and some areas they are they are still not as urbanized as they are required to be. So because of the reality of the urbanization, the non-uniform and the skewed nature of urbanization, the manufacturing units, they tends to shift due to several constraints posed by the skewed urbanization to the rural sectors. Now, if we consider the data from the annual survey of industries for the financial year 2019 to 20, it shows that the rural segment is a significant contributor when it comes to the manufacturing sector's output. 42% of the factories, they are located in rural areas. 62% of the fixed capital is also in the rural side, and this result is due to the steady stream of investment in the rural location over the last 2 decades. Now this is an important data that can be quoted in the mains examination in general studies paper 3 if there is a specific question or even a subtle kind of a reference to the manufacturing sectors in the rural area. So if we consider the output and the in terms of the output and value addition, the rural factories, they have contributed to exactly half of the total sector. And if we consider in terms of the employment, it accounts for 44%. However, the employment is 44%, but the total wage share of the sector is only 41%. Now, in the study that was published in the World Bank in the year 2012, there have been several reasons documented for this relatively steady rise and presence of rural manufacturing. The first one is that the rural areas, they are more attractive to the manufacturing firms because of three important factors that acts as the limiting factor for any manufacturing unit to establish in any location. The first one is the labor wage. The second one is the rate of the property enterprises, of course. And the third one is the land cost. If the land cost is too high, there is a probability that the manufacturing unit will not be established there. So these are the three reasons. And if we compare, if there is a relative decrease in the value of these three important factors, then of course the manufacturing sectors would be moving to the rural areas. Broadly, according to the writer, there can be three explanations for the shift of manufacturing away from the urban location to the rural areas. The first constraint is the floor space. Now, if we consider expanding a manufacturing unit in urban area, it becomes a tedious task. There is a space constraint in urbanized and congested areas. However, the floor space supply constraint is not a constraint when it comes to the rural areas. The manufacturing unit can be expanded with ease. Now, the driving force behind such shift is the continuing displacement of labor by machinery. This is in continuation with the first reason, displacement of labor by machinery. If we consider the urban areas, there is a shift towards the high end technologies and the capital investment which relies more on automation, more on robotics, and there is a less requirement for the manual labor. This what it does, because there is a decreased requirement for the manual labor, so manual labor, it gets displaced by machinery from urban areas to the rural areas. So factories, in terms of these two limiting factors, cannot be expanded in urban areas. However, it can be done so in the rural areas. Of course, there is an increased capital intensity of production is one of the reason for this trend as well. The second explanation hinges on the production cost differential. So many of the firms, they experience that there is a higher cost of production in the urban areas while the same operating cost decreases in the rural areas. The high cost of production has inevitable consequences when it comes to the firm's profitability and competitiveness. The third explanation that is given by the writer is the possibility of the capital restructuring. Now, according to this view, what happens? Now, there is a growing capital accumulation and centralization by the large multi-plant corporation. These big firms, they deliberately shift production from the, just as I had explained to you, the race to bottom context. Now, in this race to bottom, what happens? The big multinational companies, they deliberately shift their production units to the rural areas to take advantage of the labor, the low cost labor, and of course they can be skilled in any given period. And there is also a low level of unionization. What does this mean? Now, if we consider the urban areas, there is a high incidence or there is a high value for the labor union. However, the labor union is not that strong in union areas. So, due to this, there is a low bargaining power with the rural labor. So, thus decreasing the cost of production and decreasing the operating cost. So, therefore, the manufacturing units, the big manufacturing units, they have this high tendency of shifting their manufacturing units in the urban areas to the rural areas. Now, this shift from manufacturing activities to urban to rural areas, it has helped maintain the importance of manufacturing as a source to livelihood diversification in rural India. And in the aftermath of the trade liberalization, when the import competition was intensified, the Indian manufacturers, they were forced to look for the cheaper methods and location of production so as to compete with the global demand. And this especially happened after the 1991 LPG reforms. All right. Now, one way to cut the cost was to move some operation from cities to smaller towns where the labor cost will be cheaper. Now, this trend has helped make up the loss of employment in the traditional rural industry. So, this is one benefit of the shift. And the growth of the rural manufacturing, if it is seen in terms of the generation of new jobs and also providing economic base for the transition out of agriculture. Now, what does the writer here means? Now, if we look at the agriculture sector in India, then you would find there is a high, land to labor ratio is high here. So what happens, there is a hidden employment in agriculture, and the profitability in agriculture sector has reduced. The GVA, the gross value addition of the sector, has also decreased in the economy. So thus there is a migration of workers from agriculture sector to the manufacturing sector. Now, if our manufacturing sector is not that robust to absorb this stream of migration, then the situation of unemployment arises. We can have economic growth solely if we rely on the service sector. However, that would produce what we call it as jobless growth. So in order to avoid the jobless growth, we need to have a manufacturing base. So therefore, the shift from urban to rural areas provides that economic base for those who are transiting from agriculture to manufacturing sectors. Now, what are the challenges? The writer also discusses the challenges ahead of this shift. The first challenge is about reaping the benefits of the lower cost via lower rents. Now, this is basically impacts the rural labor. This basically impacts the rural labor, and this is evident from the share in terms of rent and the interest paid. The rural segment, which accounts only for the 35% of the total rent paid, while there is a 60% of the total interest payment, the benefits reaped from one source seems to be offset by the increased cost on the other front. This is one challenge that discusses, that the benefit which is reaped from one sector has been offset by the challenges in the other sector. The second challenge is the shortage of the skilled workforce. And if we consider the concept of new economy, there is a high technological growth in globally, and thus the labor has to keep in pace with the newer technology. There can be a shortage of skilled workforce. The manufacturers who depends only on the low wage workers, they simply cannot sustain the competition. They cannot have the competitive edge for longer periods because the cost advantage will vanish over time. So this is exactly what I meant by that. If there is an advantage with respect to the cost, then there is a disadvantage with respect to the skill. And if we do consider the pace at which the new economy is growing, then we have to consider reskilling, upskilling, first skilling, reskilling and upskilling of our labor so as to have a competitive edge in manufacturing sector. The supply of high skilled labor is low, which is not of adequate quantities, and therefore there is a clear suggestion with respect to the problems of rural manufacturing that the more focus should be given on education and skilling of the rural workforce. We need to, in order to have a comparative advantage from the low wages, high reliability and productivity should hasten the process of the movement out of agriculture to higher earning livelihood. So if we want to have higher income, higher per capita income, that directly corresponds to the skill of the labor. So that's it for today. I hope you understood this article, and you can try relating this article with your resource mobilization as well, that how resource gets mobilized. Indian economy, definitely we do related this article with Indian economy. So if there is a question comes with respect to the MSME industries, you can quote the annual survey of industry report which I had discussed with you, and also the World Bank paper can also be quoted. This is also case study for the students who have sociology as their optional, the chapter 6, that is work and economic life. So you can quote the study by World Bank that was published in the year 2012 with respect to the shifting of manufacturing units from urban areas to rural areas. So thank you so much for watching Tarun IAS, and if you want to download the PDF of this session, you can go to our Telegram channel. The link will be given in the description below. Have a nice day.